Welcome to Wild HOA Situations. I brought a binder and she brought excuses. I am sending this email right now, Ruth Harris shouted, jabbing her phone screen like she was activating a missile launch. She was standing 3 feet from my truck in the Riverbend Estates clubhouse lot, her pink cardigan flapping in the hot Michigan wind, orange cones piled in a leaning stack beside her. I stared at her, then at the notice she had slapped on my windshield 2 minutes earlier, and felt the sweat crawl down my neck. It was June in Grand Rapids, the kind of afternoon where the asphalt shimmers and tempers rise faster than the temperature. Ruth screamed that she could create a violation faster than I could read the rules. And I believed her, because she had just invented a reinspection fee for an inspection that never happened. I work as an electric utility lineman, which means I spend half my life on emergency call-outs and the other half exhausted. The Riverbend Estates Association does not care. They expect me to attend surprise hearings, respond to same-day notices, and pretend I have hours to burn on their paperwork games. Ruth is the board secretary, which means she controls every scrap of paper that moves through this neighborhood. And she has been weaponizing that power since the day I closed on my house. The violation notice in my hand claimed I owed $200 for a second walkthrough after a landscaping complaint. I never got a first walkthrough. I never got a landscaping complaint. I checked my email, my mailbox, and the HOA portal. Nothing. Ruth crossed her arms and smiled. The kind of smile that says she knows the rules better than I ever will and she is about to enjoy proving it. You can be mad, or you can be compliant, she said, her voice rising on the last word like it was a punchline. I glanced past her and saw a security guard standing near the clubhouse door, watching us but not intervening. He shifted his weight and looked away. I folded the notice and stuffed it in my pocket. I asked Ruth when the first inspection happened. She blinked at me, then said it was in the records. I asked where. She said I could request them through the portal. I asked why she did not include the original inspection date on the reinspection notice. She said that was not her job. The goalposts moved before I even finished the sentence. Ruth pulled out her phone and started typing, her thumbs flying across the screen. She said the board packet was being finalized this afternoon and I had to get my evidence included before it was sealed, so if I wanted to dispute the fee, I needed to submit a formal records request, a written rebuttal, and proof of compliance in a format they never mentioned until today. I asked what format. She said certified copies with notarized affidavits. I asked how long that would take. She said 30 days, maybe more, depending on the copy fees. I stared at her. The packet deadline was in 4 hours. My phone buzzed. An email from the HOA management portal. Subject line: Amenities access suspended pending resolution. I opened it. My key fob for the gym, pool, and clubhouse had been deactivated until I paid the reinspection fee. I showed Ruth the email. She shrugged and said that was standard enforcement. I asked if she knew I had never received the original inspection notice. She said she did not need proof, she had paperwork and vibes. I stared at her. She said it again, slower, like I was having trouble keeping up. I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. I checked my watch. I had a call out in 2 hours, and I could not afford to miss it. Ruth saw me look at the time and smiled wider. She said the hearing was optional, but my non-attendance would be noted as non-compliance. I asked when the hearing was. She said next Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. I told her I work days and I cannot take time off for surprise hearings. She said that was not the board's problem. I asked if the hearing could be rescheduled for an evening. She said no, the bylaws required daytime hearings for efficiency. I asked to see the bylaw. She said it was in the member handbook. I asked where I could get a copy. She said the office, but they were closed until Monday. I left the parking lot and drove home, my mind spinning. The reinspection fee made no sense. I pulled every email, every letter, every portal notification I had saved since I moved into Riverbend Estates 2 years ago. No landscaping complaint. No inspection scheduled. No walkthrough report. I logged into the HOA portal and searched the violation history. My account showed 3 closed violations from the previous owner and 1 active violation, the reinspection fee, created yesterday. No supporting documents. No inspection date. No inspector name. Just a line item. Reinspection fee. Landscaping noncompliance. $200 due immediately. I called my cousin Matt, a local attorney I know through family. He picked up on the 3rd ring and I explained the situation. He listened, then asked if I had proof the inspection never happened. I said I had my calendar, my email archive, and the portal history. He said that was a start, but I needed more. He told me to request the original complaint, the inspection report, and the board minutes that authorized the fee. He said if Ruth could not produce those records, the fee was unenforceable. He also said I should check the title report and the recorded covenants, because sometimes HOAs claim authority they never had. He gave me the name of a title company clerk who owed him a favor and said to mention his name. I spent the next 2 hours digging. I found the recorded covenants online through the County Register of Deeds. I searched for inspection, fee, and landscaping. Nothing about re-inspections. Nothing about same-day notice requirements. Nothing about amenity lockouts. I searched the board meeting minutes on the HOA portal. The last 12 months of minutes were posted, but they were scanned PDFs, blurry and hard to read. I zoomed in and scrolled. The April meeting minutes mentioned a new enforcement policy but did not include details. The May meeting minutes were missing entirely. I clicked the June meeting link. File not found. I emailed Ruth and requested the original complaint, the inspection report, and the May and June meeting minutes. She replied in 6 minutes. Her email said records requests had to be submitted in writing on the official form, which was available in the office. The office was closed until Monday. I replied and asked if she could email me the form. She said no, policy required in-person pickup. I asked if she could waive the form requirement given the time pressure. She said no, the board packet was being finalized and she could not make exceptions. I checked the clock. 90 minutes until my call out. I drove to the clubhouse. The office was dark. I tried the door. Locked. I walked around the building and found a side entrance. Also locked. I went back to my truck and called the management company listed on the HOA website. The automated system said their office hours were Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. It was Friday at 4:30. I left a voicemail explaining the situation and asking for copies of the complaint and the inspection report. I did not expect a response before Monday. I was about to leave when a silver sedan pulled into the lot. A man in his 60s got out carrying a toolbox. He wore a contractor polo and looked tired. I walked over and asked if he worked for the HOA. He said he did landscaping for the common areas. I asked if he had done any inspections for individual homeowners in the past month. He frowned and said no. The HOA did not hire him for that. He said Ruth sometimes walked the neighborhood with a clipboard, but she was not a certified inspector. I asked if he knew anything about a landscaping complaint at my address. He shook his head. I thanked him and gave him my number in case he remembered anything. I made it to my call out on time, but barely. The job was a downed line in a neighborhood 15 miles west, and it took 3 hours to restore power. By the time I got home, it was after 9. I checked my email. Nothing from the management company. Nothing from Ruth except a second email reminding me the amenity lockout was still in effect. I opened a beer and sat on my back deck, staring at the fence line. My neighbor's porch light was on and I could hear voices through the trees. I thought about the reinspection fee and the missing minutes and the record's denial. Something was wrong. This was not normal HOA pettiness. This was coordinated. I went inside and pulled up the HOA portal again. I clicked through every link, every tab, every archive. I found a section I had missed before. Vendor reports. It was buried under a submenu labeled Financial Documents. I opened it. There were 3 files from the past year. One was a landscaping invoice from March. One was a pool maintenance invoice from May. The third was a towing authorization log from April. I clicked it. The file was a scanned spreadsheet with no readable text, but I could see column headers. Date, address, violation, auth by, TOCO. I zoomed in. The auth by column was filled with initials. Most of them were RH. Ruth Harris. I scrolled down. 23 towing authorizations in April alone. I cross-referenced the addresses with the neighborhood map. Half of them were on the east side where the older homes were. I clicked back to the portal and searched for violation notices from April. The results showed 19 active violations, all landscaping or parking related, all issued by Ruth. I opened the first one. The violation notice was dated April 3rd. The tow log showed the same address on April 2nd, 1 day earlier. The tow happened before the notice. I sat back and stared at the screen. The pattern repeated. Address after address, the tow log date preceded the violation notice date by 1 or 2 days. Either Ruth was backdating the notices or she was authorizing tows without issuing warnings first. I downloaded the tow log and the violation archive and saved them to a folder. I labeled it Cold Case. I did not know what I was looking at yet, but I knew it was not right. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. Monday morning, I drove to the clubhouse office before my shift. The door was unlocked, and a woman I did not recognize was sitting at the front desk. I asked for the records request form. She handed me a clipboard with a 2-page form. I filled it out and listed the original complaint, the inspection report, the April through June meeting minutes, and the towing authorization log for the past 6 months. She took the form and said the fee was 50 cents per page. I asked how many pages that would be. She said she did not know until they processed the request. I asked how long that would take. She said 30 days, maybe longer if the records were archived. I asked if I could pay now and get copies today. She said no. They had to verify the request first. I left the office and called Matt. He said 30 days was excessive, but not illegal. He told me to request an emergency hearing with the board and to bring the tow log as evidence that the enforcement process was broken. He said if I could prove the tow dates preceded the notices, the board would have to investigate. He also said to check the city clerk's office for any HOA filings or ordinance citations, because sometimes HOAs misrepresent local laws to scare homeowners. I thanked him and hung up. I drove to the city clerk's office during my lunch break. The clerk was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. I explained I was researching an HOA enforcement issue and needed to confirm whether the city had any ordinances related to landscaping inspections or reinspection fees. She pulled up the municipal code on her computer and searched. She said the city had a property maintenance code, but it did not mention HOA inspections or reinspection fees. She asked if the HOA had cited a city ordinance. I said they had not, but I wanted to be sure. She printed a copy of the relevant code section and handed it to me. No charge. I drove back to Riverbend and knocked on the door of the neighbor who had the porch light on Friday night. His name was Dennis, and he answered holding a cup of coffee. I introduced myself and explained I was investigating an HOA enforcement issue. I asked if he had ever received a violation notice from Ruth. He laughed and said he had received 3 in the past year, all bogus. He said one was for a trash can left out past pickup, but he had security camera footage proving the can was back in the garage before noon. He said Ruth refused to look at the footage. I asked if he still had the violation notice. He said yes, and he would email me a copy. I gave him my number. Dennis sent the email that afternoon. The violation notice was dated May 10th. The tow log I had downloaded showed his address on May 9th. I forwarded both files to Matt with a short message. Same pattern, tow before notice. Matt replied an hour later. He said that was evidence of improper procedure and possibly fraud. He told me to keep gathering examples and to request an emergency hearing as soon as possible. He also said to bring a witness if I could. I spent Tuesday evening canvassing the neighborhood. I knocked on 12 doors and found 5 homeowners who had received violation notices in the past 6 months. All 5 had tow log entries that preceded the notices. 2 of them had paid fees without realizing the process was wrong. One of them, a retired teacher named Diane, said she had asked Ruth for the original complaint and was told the records were sealed pending litigation. I asked what litigation. Diane said Ruth never explained. I asked if Diane would testify at a hearing. She said yes, if it helped. Wednesday morning, I received an email from the management company. They said my records request was being processed and I would receive an invoice for copy fees within 10 business days. I replied and asked for an emergency hearing with the board to address the reinspection fee. They responded in 20 minutes. They said emergency hearings required board approval and Ruth was the point of contact for scheduling. I emailed Ruth and requested an emergency hearing. She replied in 8 minutes. She said emergency hearings were only granted for safety issues, and a fee dispute did not qualify. I replied and said the fee was based on an inspection that never happened, and the enforcement process appeared to violate the bylaws. She said I was welcome to dispute the fee at the next regular board meeting in July. July was 3 weeks away. I checked my watch and felt the pressure tighten. The board packet was already finalized, which meant my rebuttal would not be included unless I forced it in. I called Matt again. He said I needed to escalate. He told me to file a formal complaint with the management company and copy the entire board. He said to include the tow log, the violation comparisons, and the city clerk confirmation. He said to demand a response within 5 business days. He also said to mention potential legal action if they refused to investigate. I drafted the email and sent it that afternoon. The management company replied Thursday morning. They said they had forwarded my complaint to the board and would schedule a hearing within 30 days. I replied and said 30 days was unacceptable given the time pressure and the evidence of procedural violations. They did not respond. Ruth sent me a separate email Thursday afternoon. She said my amenity lockout would remain in effect until the fee was paid or the dispute was resolved. She also said the board had received multiple complaints about my confrontational behavior in the parking lot, and if I continued to harass board members, they would pursue a restraining order. I stared at the screen. I had spoken to Ruth once in the parking lot for less than 5 minutes. I forwarded the email to Matt. He said it was retaliation and we could use it. Friday afternoon, I received a certified letter in the mail. The envelope had dirt-smudged corners and a return address from the city planning department. I opened it. The letter was a confirmation that the Riverbend Estates Association had inquired about a city landscaping ordinance in March, and the city had replied that no such ordinance existed. The letter included a scanned copy of the HOA's original inquiry, which claimed the city required homeowners to maintain front yard landscaping to specific standards and authorized HOA inspections to enforce compliance. The city's reply stated clearly that the claim was false. The letter was dated March 15th. I stared at the letter and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. Ruth had lied. The HOA had misrepresented city law to justify the inspection scheme. I scanned the letter and emailed it to Matt. He called me 10 minutes later. He said the letter was a smoking gun. He said if the HOA had cited city authority to justify fees and inspections, and the city had already told them the authority did not exist, that was fraud. He told me to request an emergency hearing immediately and to threaten to file a complaint with the state attorney general if they refused. He also told me to prepare for Ruth to escalate, because she would know I had the evidence and she would try to bury it. I emailed the management company again and attached the city letter. I demanded an emergency hearing within 48 hours. I copied the entire board, including Ruth. I stated that the HOA had misrepresented city authority, backdated violation notices, and authorized tows without proper notice. I requested a full audit of the enforcement records and a refund of all fees tied to the landscaping inspection scheme. I ended the email with a line Matt had suggested: if the board refuses to address this matter immediately, I will file a formal complaint with the Michigan Attorney General and pursue legal action. The response came in 30 minutes. Not from the management company, from Ruth. She said my allegations were baseless and defamatory. She said the board had full authority to enforce community standards under the recorded covenants. She said the city letter was irrelevant because the HOA had never claimed city authority. She said the tow log was confidential and I had accessed it without authorization. She said my records request was being denied unless I paid ridiculous copy fees and wait 30 days, and any further harassment would result in a formal complaint to law enforcement. I read the email twice. Every sentence was a lie. I forwarded it to Matt and to Dennis and Diane. I told them to save it. Saturday morning, I received a text from Dennis. He said another neighbor had just received a violation notice, and the tow truck was already in the neighborhood. I grabbed my keys and drove to the address Dennis had given me. The tow truck was parked in the driveway, and a flatbed was being lowered behind a Honda sedan. Ruth was standing on the sidewalk holding a clipboard. I parked and walked over. Ruth saw me and smiled. She said this was none of my business and I needed to leave. I asked the tow driver if he had a signed authorization. He glanced at Ruth, then at me. He said Ruth had called it in. I asked if he had seen the violation notice. He said no. Ruth said it was in the system. I pulled out my phone and showed him the tow log I had downloaded. I pointed to the date column. I said the log showed tows happening before notices, which meant the authorizations were fraudulent. The driver stared at the screen, then at Ruth. Ruth stepped forward and said I was interfering with HOA enforcement and she would call the police. I said I welcomed that, because I wanted a deputy to review the records on scene. The driver held up his hand and said he was not towing the car until he saw a signed authorization and a violation notice. Ruth said she had the authority and that was enough. The driver said no, his company required documentation for liability. Ruth pulled out her phone and started dialing. I asked the driver for his card. He handed me one. I thanked him and told him to expect a call from my attorney. He nodded and started raising the flatbed. Ruth screamed at him to stop. He ignored her and climbed into the truck. The flatbed lifted, and the Honda rolled back onto the driveway. The homeowner came out of the house, a woman in her 30s holding a toddler. She asked what was happening. I introduced myself and explained the situation. Ruth interrupted and said I was spreading lies and the violation was legitimate. The homeowner asked to see the notice. Ruth said it was in the mail. The homeowner said she had checked her mailbox that morning, and there was nothing. Ruth said the notice was sent electronically. The homeowner pulled out her phone and checked the HOA portal. No notice. Ruth said the portal was delayed. The homeowner said this was ridiculous, and she was filing a complaint. Ruth said complaints had to be submitted in writing. The homeowner said she would hire a lawyer. Ruth said that was her choice, then turned and walked to her car. She slammed the door and drove away. The tow driver gave me a nod and followed her out of the neighborhood. I gave the homeowner my number and Dennis's number. I told her to document everything and to request copies of the tow authorization and the violation notice. She thanked me and went back inside. I sat in my truck and called Matt. I told him what had happened. He laughed and said Ruth had just committed interference with a contracted service, and if the tow company filed a complaint, it could open the HOA to liability. He told me to follow up with the tow driver and get a statement. He also said the scene I had just described was exactly the kind of public humiliation that would turn other homeowners against Ruth, and I should make sure everyone knew about it. I spent the rest of Saturday reaching out to neighbors. I sent a group email to everyone I had canvassed and included a summary of the tow truck incident. I attached the city letter, the tow log comparison, and Ruth's threatening email. I asked anyone with similar experiences to reply. By Sunday morning, I had 12 responses. 8 people said they had paid fees they now believed were fraudulent. 4 people said they had been threatened with amenity lockouts. 2 people said Ruth had told them the city required inspections, and they had paid without questioning it. 1 person said they had tried to run for the board last year, and Ruth had disqualified their petition on a technicality. Monday morning, I received a call from a board member I had never met. His name was Greg, and he said he had just read my emails and the attachments. He said he believed me. He said Ruth had been pushing aggressive enforcement policies for 2 years, and he had always felt uncomfortable but never had proof. He said he would not say it on the record because Ruth controlled the meeting minutes and the board packets, but he wanted me to know I was not alone. I asked if he would vote to remove Ruth if I brought the evidence to a hearing. He said yes, but it would take a majority vote, and Ruth had 2 other board members in her pocket. I asked what it would take to get a majority. He said a recall petition or a member vote at the annual meeting. The annual meeting was in August, 6 weeks away. I called Matt and told him about Greg. Matt said a member vote was the cleanest path, but it required organizing. He said I needed to build a coalition, get signatures, and present a motion at the annual meeting to remove Ruth and the board members who supported her. He said the motion would need to cite specific policy violations and evidence of misconduct. He told me to draft the motion and circulate it for feedback. He also said to expect Ruth to fight back hard, because she would see it coming. Tuesday afternoon, I received an email from the management company. They said my records request had been approved, and the copy fee was $650. I replied and asked for an itemized invoice. They sent a spreadsheet. 300 pages at 50 cents per page, plus a $100 processing fee and a $50 certification fee. I forwarded it to Matt. He said the fees were punitive and possibly illegal under Michigan's nonprofit transparency laws. He told me to file a complaint with the state and to copy the board. I did. The state replied in 3 business days and said they were reviewing the complaint. Ruth sent me another email Wednesday morning. She said the board had reviewed my allegations and found them without merit. She said the reinspection fee was still due, and if I did not pay by Friday, the HOA would file a lien on my property. I called Matt. He said a lien required a judgment or a valid debt, and the HOA had neither. He told me to reply and state that any lien filing would be contested and could result in sanctions for frivolous action. I sent the reply and copied the entire board. Ruth did not respond. Thursday evening, I received a text from the tow driver I had met on Saturday. He said his company had reviewed the authorization records and found discrepancies. He said Ruth had been calling in tows without submitting the required paperwork, and the company was suspending service to the HOA pending an audit. He said he could not give me details, but he wanted me to know the company was taking it seriously. I thanked him and forwarded the text to Matt and Greg. Friday afternoon, I stopped at the hardware store to pick up supplies for a weekend project. I was loading lumber into my truck when Ruth pulled into the lot. She parked 2 spaces away and got out. She walked toward me, her face red, her arms swinging. She said I had cost the HOA its towing contract and I was going to pay for it. I said the HOA cost itself the contract by authorizing illegal tows. She said I was a liar and a troublemaker. I said I had proof. She said proof did not matter, she had paperwork and vibes. A couple loading groceries into their car stopped and stared. The man asked if everything was okay. Ruth ignored him and stepped closer. She said the board was filing a lawsuit for defamation and harassment, and I would be named personally. I pulled out my phone and opened the city letter. I held it up so she could see it. I said the city had already told the HOA the inspection scheme was based on a lie, and I was ready to show that letter to a judge. Ruth grabbed for the phone. I stepped back. The man from the grocery car moved between us and told Ruth to back off. She screamed at him to mind his own business. He said she was making a scene and he was calling the police if she did not leave. Ruth stared at him, then at me, then got in her car and drove away. The man asked if I was okay. I said yes, and I thanked him. He said he lived in Riverbend and he had heard about the HOA problems. He said he would sign any petition I circulated. I gave him my number. Saturday morning, I finalized the recall petition. The motion called for the removal of Ruth Harris and 2 other board members for procedural violations, misrepresentation of authority, and retaliatory enforcement. I listed the evidence, the city letter, the tow log, the backdated notices, the records denial, and the threatening emails. I included a proposed replacement, a neutral panel elected by the membership to serve until the next annual meeting. I emailed the draft to Matt. He reviewed it and said it was solid. He told me to start collecting signatures and to aim for at least 50% of the membership. I printed 50 copies of the petition and spent the weekend canvassing. By Sunday evening, I had 63 signatures. Dennis and Diane helped me reach homeowners I had not met yet. Greg quietly spread the word to people he trusted. The momentum built fast. Monday morning, I submitted the petition to the management company and requested an emergency member meeting to vote on the recall. The management company replied Tuesday and said they would schedule the meeting for the following Saturday. Ruth sent a mass email to the membership Tuesday afternoon. She said the recall petition was based on false accusations and personal vendettas. She said the board had followed all procedures and the enforcement actions were lawful. She said anyone who signed the petition had been misled. She attached a letter from the HOA attorney stating that the recall motion was procedurally deficient and would not be recognized. I forwarded Ruth's email to Matt. He read the attorney letter and laughed. He said the letter was a bluff and the motion was fully compliant with the bylaws. He told me to reply to the membership and attach the evidence. I did. I included the city letter, the tow log comparisons, and Ruth's boomerang line email where she said she did not need proof, she had paperwork and vibes. I ended the email with a line, "You can be mad, or you can be compliant. Let us vote." The emergency member meeting was held Saturday at 10 in the morning in the clubhouse. The room was packed. Over 100 homeowners showed up, more than I had ever seen at an HOA event. Ruth sat at the front table with the two board members named in the petition. Greg sat off to the side. The management company representative stood at a lectern. He opened the meeting and explained the recall process. He said the motion required a 2/3 vote to pass. He called for public comment. I walked to the front. I had the city letter in one hand and a printed copy of the tow log in the other. I explained the reinspection fee, the missing inspection, and the backdated notices. I held up the city letter and read the key sentence. The city has no ordinance requiring HOA landscaping inspections, and the association's claim to the contrary is incorrect. I showed the tow log and pointed to 3 examples where the tow date preceded the violation notice. I said the enforcement scheme had cost homeowners thousands of dollars in fraudulent fees, and Ruth had retaliated against anyone who questioned her. Ruth stood and said I was lying. She said the HOA had full authority under the covenants and the city letter was irrelevant. I asked her to produce the original complaint and inspection report for my property. She said the records were sealed. I asked why. She said it was board policy. I asked what policy. She said it was in the bylaws. I asked her to cite the section. She could not. The room erupted. Homeowners started shouting questions. The management company representative called for order. Ruth sat down, her face pale. Diane stood and testified about her violation and the sealed records claim. Dennis stood and showed his security camera footage proving his trash can was returned on time. The man from the hardware store stood and described Ruth's confrontation in the parking lot. One by one, homeowners shared their stories. The pattern was undeniable. Ruth had weaponized enforcement, backdated notices, and lied about authority. The management company representative called for a vote. The vote was 78 in favor, 12 against, and 6 abstentions. The recall passed. Ruth stood and said the vote was invalid because the motion was procedurally deficient. The management company representative said the motion was valid and the board members named in the petition were removed effective immediately. Ruth screamed that she would sue. Greg stood and said the board would cooperate with a full audit. Ruth grabbed her bag and walked out. The room applauded. The neutral panel was elected the following week. Greg agreed to serve as interim president. The panel hired an independent auditor to review the enforcement records. The audit took 3 weeks. The report confirmed that Ruth had authorized 29 tows without proper notice, backdated 17 violation notices, and misrepresented city authority in 14 cases. The HOA refunded the fines and fees tied to the scheme, including my $200 reinspection fee. Ruth's complaint against me was ruled unfounded with evidence cited. The tow company resumed service under a revised contract that required signed authorizations and violation notices for every tow. Ruth resigned from the board in writing the day before the audit report was released, citing personal reasons. She moved out of Riverbend 3 months later. The favorite fee she had invented, the reinspection fee, was proven imaginary in the ledger. There was no budget line, no policy, no authorization. She had made it up. The new board voted to ban reinspection fees and to require public notice for all enforcement actions. A homeowner vote that removed Ruth's committee and replaced it with a neutral panel became the turning point for Riverbend Estates. I kept the dirt-smudged certified letter envelope in a file folder on my desk. I checked my watch constantly during those weeks, because the deadlines never stopped and the pressure never lifted. But in the end, the evidence was enough. The cold case was closed. The scheme was exposed. The neighborhood moved on. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.